at it again, folks. We need to finish our apron, and it is this apron right here, just the lap apron, not the bib apron. So this will be part 4. There are some things I need to point out before we start our sewing. We've cut out our pieces, but now we need to make sure that our sewing machine is set up properly. There are different sizes of needles that go in your sewing machine. And if you will notice, you've got an orange band, a blue band, and a purple band. And they even have a smaller size which has a green band. And if you see the color coordinates, here's the blue, coordinates with that color. These are different sizes of needles. Some needles are really thick. Like if you're going to sew denim, you would need a really tough needle. But if you're going to sew lace or something very silky, you would need a much thinner needle, so it wouldn't leave big holes in your fabric. So they give you different sizes, and it's according to the weight of your material. I'm using a cotton, so I'm going to use an orange color needle. And if you look on the back, it helps you size up what it should be. Also, the different feet you should know about on your machine, because you want to use the correct sewing foot. This is our regular sewing foot. It looks big, doesn't it? The gap in the middle of this sewing foot allows for you to do zigzag, which would allow your needle to move back and forth in that gap. But this is a good fit for just regular sewing. If you want to sew really close to your certain stitchings, we call this a zipper foot. And a zipper foot, you need to sew really close to the teeth on your zipper when you're sewing in one of these. So you use this foot for that. You can use it for other things, but it's rare. So our first important foot we got to put in is just our regular sewing foot. Now this all depends on your particular machine, so always look at your manual. Okay, we're going to put our foot in. It's going to slide right on here, and then we've got to really tighten in this screw that will hold this in place. Okay, that's where your foot goes. Then you need to thread. Ooh, that's a close-up, isn't it? Thread your bobbin. This is just the bobbin holder. It is not your bobbin, but it does go into this holder holds your bobbin into the machine. The threaded needle goes down below, picks up the bobbin thread, and creates a loop. So you are making tiny little, the bottom thread is looped. Each time your needle comes down and eats up a little more of that thread. Little slip knots, and that keeps your thread in place. Okay, important rule. I know that on my pattern I'm going to be sewing my pockets first, so therefore I want to get the right thread. This is thread that looks really nice, or I could go a little lighter, but I think I'm going to stick with this thread. I don't mind if it shows just a little bit. Okay, I want my bottom thread, of course, to match my top thread. So we have to load our bobbin first with thread. On this machine, you take your thread, and you kind of wind it around there once, and then I wind some up on, hand wind on this little bobbin. This machine then asks me to push this mechanism, this bobbin, forward onto this wheel. I also loosen my hand wheel. so that I can load the machine. And loosening the hand wheel just keeps your needle from bobbing up and down. You never want to poke yourself with your needle that's in the machine. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to load this bobbin. Alright folks, sorry for the camera angle, but here we go. Now, I'm not using a lot of yellow thread, so I'm not going to totally load up my bobbin, mainly because I'm probably going to want to put some other color on here eventually. This should be plenty. I have enough thread here, and I'm now going to load this into my machine. So I just cut off and left a tail of thread. Hard to see, I know, I'm sorry. Let's try and get you set down so I don't make you so dizzy. Alright, here we go. There's a little bit of tail. I now need to load this into my machine. And this is where we take this bobbin cap and we put our bobbin into this cap. Now if you look at the cap, it looks like it has this funny arm up here, doesn't it? Well, if you point the arm going in that angle, and you're going to want to put the thread in, well, you want the thread to wind in this angle. Meaning your thread lies in this direction. Can you see against my hands? So you want the opposite of that arm. You just slide that in place, hold the bobbin in place, hold it there because it will want to move. You're just going to take your string, your extra thread, and just kind of pull it back and keep pulling it until it clicks into place. And what you'll see, there's a big gap in here where this thread pulls into place. And we're going to put this then into our mechanism below our sewing arm. Goes in here. You see that little arm, how it wants to move all around? I know it's not in place yet because that should lock in place. It shouldn't move. And I'm just going to, oh, there, you hear the click? Now it's locked in place. Leave this extra thread hanging out. You want that. And now we need to thread the top part of our machine. I'm not gonna lie, this is taking finesse here. One-handed, I don't know about this. Okay, here we go. You take your top thread, and according to your instructions of your machine, you thread the top part of your machine. Mine just happens to go like this. Check your individual machines. Okay, I wrapped it around that post once, and now I need to bring it through this tooth here, this gap. I'm going to put it right here through my tension wheel, and that's very important to know about that tension wheel. Let me move up this little thing in through here. Okay, pick this up again. The tension wheel lets you tighten or loosen so you get a good solid stitch. Some stitches, maybe if you're doing a heavier fabric, you might need to loosen this tension wheel, and if you're doing thinner fabrics, you might need to tighten it. It all depends. You work with it until you get the right tension so you're getting a good stitch. Alright, I've wound it all the way through like I'm supposed to, and now what's missing? My needle's missing. If you notice, there's a little screw over here that you want to loosen. See how wobbly that is? The needle, let's put our presser foot down. This is called a presser foot, which is what we explained about before, but the technical term for this is called presser foot. And I'm going to use my hand wheel to raise the bar and the screw. That's kind of hard for you to see, sorry. So that I can put in my needle. Needles are shaped weird. There's a little flat side to the needle. One side is flat and the rest is kind of a half circle. It's angled. It's a half circle with a flat side. So you'll find that it only fits comfortably a particular way inside the shaft here of the sewing machine. Now tighten that screw down. Tighten it nice and tight. So you see it's holding my needle. And now we're going to have to thread our needle. So here it goes. Wish me luck. By the way, if you find that you have little fuzzies on the end of your thread, sometimes it gets really fuzzy. Whoops. Kind of hard to see, huh? This one looks pretty good. Just snip it a little bit. Snip it off the little fuzzy end and get you a nice clean end. Nice clean edge. And that will go through your needle much easier. Also, you can wet the end a little bit. I just stick it in my mouth and wet it a little bit. I know, sounds gross, but it really does help. So, I just kind of wet a little bit. And now I'm going to try and stick it right, whoops, sorry, bump the camera, right into this hole. There is a hole towards the end of the needle. Believe me or not, it's there. Okay, so here we've got the needle threaded. Now remember, we still have this needle hanging out the bottom of our sewing machine. Well, what are we going to do with that? I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take our hand wheel, that big hand wheel that I use on the side, and that just lets me move it manually with my hand, not trying to move it with the presser foot yet, or the sewing foot. Do not use that yet. You always want to use your hands because you can control it much better. So I'm holding on to the top strand. I work my needle all the way down and come up. And you'll notice as you start to pull this thread up, see how I pull it up? Can you see this here? It might be hard to see. See that loop? That is your bottom thread. This needle and this thread hold up the bottom thread. And now just finish pulling the rest of that tail up. So here you've got now that bottom thread that was in your bobbin now up to the top side of your sewing machine. Okay, you're going to put it into the back with your top thread. Now you're ready to sew. Okay. Well, according to my instructions, the first thing that I am told to do is to take my pocket and sew around the curves, 3/8 inside from the raw edge. This is the raw edge. Your material, the edge that you cut out, is considered the raw edge. And they want me to do a basting stitch, or another word for it is a large stitch. What does that mean? A basting stitch is when you take the biggest stitch bite that you can, and it's a very loose stitch. It is not meant to sew your material together. It's to help you gather your material, and then you will do a regular sewing stitch over that. So measure at most seams are a 5/8 seam, unless they tell you otherwise. You're using a 5/8 seam, but right now, because I'm just doing this basting stitch, I'm only going to go over 3/8 inch from my raw edge. Okay, make sure you set your seam stitch to the widest stitch possible. Your stitch length. My stitch length, I can go all the way up to number 4. My regular stitch is much smaller than that. So I'm going to go down. I'm just going to keep it. This is not as important to get as perfect as you would like the finished stitch. This is just to help us gather the circle, create a better circle. Sometimes I lift up my foot a little bit to help adjust on something like this because I'm going in, I'm going in a circular motion. This stitch will not show once we're done sewing everything together. By the way, when you start turning your corners, if you lift up your foot, make sure that the needle is in the fabric so it will not move where the stitch is in the wrong direction. It will not move it to the right or to the left. And that's how you can adjust things a little bit. So see how my needle is still in there? I can lift my foot and know I will not be sewing over here or sewing off. It'll kind of keep it in line. Okay, once I get to my other needle, my straight needle, I want to raise up my needle and gently pull this out. I'm going to need a nice big long tail. Relax your thread. Don't hold it tight when you cut it because it'll jump back, and a lot of times you'll have to rethread this needle. So just relax. And I'm going to cut it about halfway between. You always want to end up with a good amount of tail before you start your next stitching, because the machine takes up some thread and you could lose it from your needle, and you have to rethread it, and that's a pain. Okay, so now we have stitched a basting stitch just around the corners. Why do we do around this circular edge? Because it's very hard to make a nice circular edge by just trying to fold everything under, and this just helps you. Just want to kind of just work the fabric along that thread line, your stitch line rather, until you get to start to gather like a ruffle. And that's how you make ruffles, by the way. You just doing it like that. Kind of made my pocket look nice. You will do more adjusting as you sew, but it gives you, okay, you see how that kind of just made my fabric curl nicely under? That's why we do it like that. And I would do the other one the same way. So you're kind of gathering the fabric. Now don't be afraid to adjust the fabric a little bit. Now be very careful about holding on too tight. Be careful about holding on too tightly to your thread. Just kind of, you're just gently working the fabric along that thread. I'm going to do some pressing with the iron to create my finished pocket. And because I gathered this curved section, it is really going to help me to be able to make a nice smooth curved pocket. So I did the same thing to this curved edge, and I just took the top thread, and you can feel it. You can just gently feel your fabric move along that thread. Don't pull thread here and just hold to this thread. You're not pulling it, you're just holding it as you work the fabric on that thread around your curve. Alright, I'm going to go press this. Alrighty, I have ironed my pocket. This is the back side, and you can see how this really helped me make a nice curved edge. So when I turn it over, boy, does that look like a nice pocket. See a nice curved edge? And we're going to top stitch over this. Top stitch means we're going to lay this down against some other fabric, and we're going to top stitch all of it together. You will see this stitching. So it's very important you use the color of thread that you like. I could have gone with white, I could have gone with black, but I've decided to go with yellow. And you'll see I still have my basting stitch in there. Don't worry about that. We'll pull that out once we've top stitched to our other piece of fabric. important. You never want to disregard any of these little tricks of the trade, the fold line, the grain line, what number you're using. And so I'm going to measure this, and whoops, I need to go, I have a little more than ½ inch. Okay, about 3/4 of an inch. They want me to fold it over and sew it in 3/4 of an inch. So they want me to turn my pocket over this way, 3/4 of an inch. Let's fold this out. So I'm going to measure that. Okay. Okay, let's pin it. Measure it on this side. This is the top piece. Same amount. So once I fold it over, they're going to want me to stitch from here down and stop. That's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to make sure my sewing machine is turned back to a regular stitch length. And I'm going to stitch from this top edge just down to here, and I'm going to stitch it where my stitching line would be, and I'll show you where my turn line would be. Alright, let's do that next. This side, and you want to start in, not right on the very edge of your fabric, because you're going to want to make a locking stitch. It tells me to just sew this little tab down right here. I'm starting in just a couple stitches inside. I use my hand wheel to move the needle down, and then I can use my foot pedal. I'm going to reverse my stitching to lock it in place, and then stitch all the way to the other edge and reverse again to lock that in place. And that is so your stitching will not come out on you. Let me first sew this other side and then we'll trim. Once again, I didn't flip over my fabric now to stitch this side. I kept it the same way, this being the back, and I just moved it over here, and I'm just placing my needle down where I can see where my turn line is, where I had turned it over before. Start it again, sew a little bit, sew backwards, this needle out, and then sew forward to get where you need to be, back it up, and now we have sewn these two sides. These two sides. Okay. I can trim this really close because I don't need a bunch of tails hanging off my fabric right now. But I want to make sure I have enough tail left on my needle. The threads from your fabric, be very careful. I've tried to get really close with my scissors at times, and I've snipped my fabric. Like, oops, well, that's not going to do me any good. I prefer to just find my tail of my thread, and so you found, see how that is really close, the edge to your fabric. I've just taken my scissors and kind of just use it as a knife to trim it off. If I try to cut it, sometimes you end up nicking your fabric, and you're like, oh no, I got to cut a whole nother piece of the pattern because I've now put a hole in my fabric. So if you want to make sure you don't do that, just use your knife, hold the thread tight, and use your scissors as a knife, and then you don't accidentally cut cut your thread. Now, when you do this regular stitching, you want to trim all your threads right away. I still have my basting thread in here, and I have that on purpose so that my curve is kept. I will pull it out once I'm done sewing or stitching this onto my fabric. Make sure you also turn your fabric over and get the bottom tails. You see how there's tails there? You do the same thing. Be very careful, hold it tight, and just kind of use that. Oh, I can get a little bit with my scissors, snip a little bit. But I prefer you kind of just use it like a knife, the edge of your scissors. Hopefully you can see this. Not easy one-handed. So, take it. Whoops, sorry. And I have to get a good grip. There we go. And just use, there. Now I've trimmed the tails off of both sides of my stitching. Looks good. Do the other side too. Alright. Nice clean edge. You see how we trim that? All nice and neat. I'm also going to just barely take off a little bit. See if I can show it to you. Just a little bit of this tip. Don't cut your stitching. Just kind of take off the tip. See, I took off that tip. I'll try this here too on this side. Just take off the tip just a little bit. And it's just so we don't have so much bulk when we turn this over. Sometimes I use a pencil to work out this out. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. I'm just kind of trying to take the fabric on the inside and get it poked out as much as possible. Can you see what I'm doing here? I'm just poking that out. So now when I lay this over, look, we got a nice clean edge. See how nice that looks? And then this right in through here is not so bulky. It'd be really thick if we left all that material inside. So once we've done both of these pockets, we will take it and top stitch it to our next pattern piece. There you have a nice pocket. Isn't that nice? Okay, join me next time. Hopefully this answered some of your pocket concerns. All right. See you next time.